Hello and welcome to a couple of readings, the first of two readings, one for the 3rd of January and the next one's going to be the 4th of January. I've not decided what I'm going to be doing for Sundays for the future, but I've been reading Christmas carols from Village Green to Church Choir by Andrew Gant, and it seems that I've found the follow-up to it, Deck the Hall, the stories of our favourite Christmas carols by the same author. And what I intend to do for Twelfth Night, in the previous book we have the 12 days of Christmas, and in this book it's a carol for 12th day. And of course in the former book for Epiphany it's got We Three Kings and What Child Is This, and in this one, As With Gladness, Men of Old. What I intend to do here tonight is to read you 3 and then do another 3 tomorrow, and then do the 12th night one, the Epiphany, and the night after do 3 more carols on the 7th for the 7th, and one of them I've never heard of, the second one. And of course there is a section in here called Christmas Partying, where unbelievably they've included one of my favourite Christmas songs, Jingle Bells, and I thought I would do that along with the other two ones that night, Sussex Mummer's Carol and Tomorrow Shall Be My Dancing Day. Well, tonight I'm going to read about the Cherry Tree Carol, which is the Annunciation, March the 25th, I think. That's for the Annunciation. And we've done Of the Father's Heart Begotten. Wasn't much on it, but I won't repeat it. I mean, this is the book I'm going to read next Christmas, God willing. And then tonight, I shall do In the Bleak Midwinter, and I Wonder As I Wander, the ones I'm going to miss. Angelus ad Wergenem, Es ist ein Los entsprungen, Great and Mighty Wonder, Of the Father's Heart Begotten, and Once in Royal David's City. So tonight I'm going to do the Cherry Tree Carol, In the Bleak Midwinter, which we did cover originally but not nearly enough as I wanted to, and I Wonder As I Wander. So firstly, the Cherry Tree Carol, and this has got 18 verses. The Cherry Tree Carol, and I shall read them. Joseph was an old man, and an old man was he, and he married Mary, the Queen of Galilee. When Joseph was married, and Mary home had brought, Mary proved with child, and Joseph knew it not. Joseph and Mary walked through a garden gay, where the cherries they grew upon every tree. O then bespoke Mary with words both meek and mild, O gather me cherries, Joseph, they run so in my mind. And then replied Joseph with his words so unkind, Let him gather thee cherries that got thee with child. O then bespoke our Saviour, and in his mother's womb, Bow down, good cherry tree, to my mother's hand. The uppermost sprig bowed down to Mary's knee. Thus you may see, Joseph, these cherries are for me. Oh, eat your cherries, Mary, oh, eat your cherries now. Oh, eat your cherries, Mary, that grow upon the bough. As Joseph was a-walking, he heard an angel sing, This night shall be born our heavenly King. He neither shall be born in housen, nor in hall, nor in the place of paradise, but in an ox's stall. He neither shall be clothed in purple nor in pall, but all in fair linen as were babies all. He neither shall be rocked in silver nor in gold, but in a wooden cradle that rocks on the mould. He neither shall be christened in white wine nor red, but with fair spring water with which we were christened. Then Mary took her young son and set him on her knee. I pray thee now, dear child, tell how this world shall be. Oh, I shall be as dead, mother, as the stones in the wall. Oh, the stones in the street, mother, shall mourn for me all. And upon a Wednesday my vow I will make, and upon Good Friday my death I will take. Upon Easter Day, mother, my rising shall be. Oh, the sun and the moon shall uprise with me. The people shall rejoice, and the birds they shall sing, to see the uprising of the heavenly King. So it covers quite a lot, the Cherry Tree Carol. So right from the start of the Christmas story, not everyone was happy with the direction events were taking. Just as Thomas, at the other end of Christ's life and ministry, is called upon to express an all too human doubt on behalf of us all at what he sees unfolding before his eyes, so Joseph, when he learns his wife is to have a baby, can be forgiven for a moment of understandable bafflement, even anger. There is a rich vein of folk carols, ballads and dramas that draw touchingly on this painful and puzzling little family scene. Many are revealed to us in manuscript and printed sources dating from the 16th century and before, suggesting that they had existed as part of an oral tradition long before that. The scholar Edith Rickert records one from the time of Henry VII or VIII, in which Joseph comments ruefully, I, Joseph, wonder how this may be, that Mary wax great when I and she ever have lived in chastity. If she be with child, it is not by me. In an English mystery play of the later 15th century, Joseph arrives home from an arduous journey finding food for his family to be confronted with his wife's mysterious pregnancy. Mary nervously recounts the story of her visit from the angel, adding slightly coyly that the child is God's, and yours, I say, Uis. The anonymous dramatists who wrote these plays captured Joseph's hurt and shame with insightful accuracy. An angel? Alas, alas, fie for shame! To put an angel in so great blame. Alas, alas, let be do way. It was some boy began this game. Alas, alas, my name is Shent. All men may me now despise, and say, old cuckold, thy bow is bent, newly now after the French guise. Alas, and well away. Alas, dame, why didst thou so? In these accounts, Joseph's doubts are allayed by the arrival of a second angel. Poor puzzled Joseph recognises that this is not just some boy dressed up, and begs forgiveness from both Mary and God for his harsh words. Both give it freely. Like some other carols with their roots in impenetrably ancient folk traditions, this little story found itself involved and intermingled with some of the myths and narratives that grew up around the emergence and growth of the early church. The four canonical Gospels leave some pretty big holes in their account of Christ's life, especially his childhood. In the centuries following his death, creatively minded scholars and theologians filled the gaps and coloured in the detail in a series of texts known collectively as the New Testament Apocrypha. A notable subset of these colourful inventions is the group known as the Infancy Gospels. Here is Christ's early life in all its miraculous and mischievous reality. One of them has come down to us under the old title of the Gospel of Pseudo-Matthew. The name reveals several layers of historical uncertainty. Early sources contain a preface in the form of letters between two bishops and the church father St. Jerome. They state confidently that the volume which follows is written by the hand of the most blessed evangelist Matthew. Modern scholars believe that the fundamental text of Pseudo-Matthew probably dates from the early 7th century. It is not by Matthew, and the preface and translation are not by Jerome, but the name stuck. English scholarly editions of the New Testament Apocrypha appeared in the 18th and 19th centuries, including an important version by the prolific satirist, bookseller and campaigner for press freedom William Hone, also a significant collector and editor of Christmas carols. Pseudo-Matthew gives the medieval imagination the sort of fantastical fables of divine intervention which it loved, a sort of celebrity culture of the doings of saints and angels, recreated endlessly in plays, songs, myths, carvings, corbels and choir stalls. Here the boy Jesus tames dragons, lions and leopards, and commands stone idols in a pagan temple to bow down before him. All of this happens during the Holy Family's flight into Egypt to escape the murderous jealousy of Herod. Another Elysian of elements approached from this direction, maybe. The Cherry Tree Carol belongs more properly in the Holy Innocent section of this book rather than under A for Annunciation. An example of how folk carols often move seamlessly between seasons and stories, taking in the entire Christian worldview from creation to last things. For present purposes, we turn to the little story in chapter 20. The family has stopped to rest. Not finding a cave, they sit under the welcome shade of a palm tree. What is chapter 20, by the way? Oh, chapter 20 in that book, I assume. Not finding a cave, they sit under the welcome shade of a palm tree. Mary gazes up at the fruit of the palm, most likely a banana palm, botanists tell us, and wishes she could reach it. Joseph reverts to type, practical but prickly. I wonder that thou sayest this, when thou seest how high the palm tree is, and that thou thinkest of eating of its fruit. I am thinking more of the want of water, because the skins are now empty, and we have none wherewith to refresh ourselves and our cattle. The boy Jesus, resting in his mother's arms, intervenes. He orders the tree to bow down and offer Mary its fruit. It does so. He then summons fresh water from a spring among its roots, clear and cool and sparkling. People and beasts, refreshed and satisfied, give thanks. The story resurfaces some 7 centuries later. Naturally, it has changed a good deal. The Town plays are a collection of 42 medieval mystery dramas, mostly based on Bible stories with a strong dash of legend, license and local folk tradition. They date from the late 15th century. The name Town comes from a line in a prologue or proclamation in which a vexellator or standard bearer informs his audience, "A Sunday next, if that we may, at 6 of the bell we begin our play. In Town, wherefore we pray, that God now be our speed. Amen." Town could be Norwich, it could be Coventry. N stands for Nomen, or name. The vexellator would supply the name of the next stop on their itinerary before his troupe of travelling players packed their primitive scenery into their wooden carts and trundled off once more, dogs and children noisily in pursuit, to start the cycle again in some new covered corn exchange, malodorous Market Square or Lichgate Step. Scholars tentatively place the play somewhere in the East Midlands, probably East Anglia, possibly Norfolk, or possibly not. Editions and references from the 17th right through to the 20th centuries refer to the cycle as the Ludus Coventrii, or Coventry Plays, after the belief that they were played there, but this is another misattribution which proved difficult to dislodge. Play 15 in the series tells of the Nativity. In it, the story of the miraculous tree offering fruit to Mary reappears. There are several important differences in detail from the apocryphal account. The family is on its way to Bethlehem, not Egypt. The child Jesus is still in his mother's womb, not her arms. It is Mary who asks the tree for succour, not Joseph or Jesus. And no doubt in response to the relocation of events to the more temperate clime of medieval Norfolk, the tree has become a cherry tree. The exchange between husband and heavily pregnant wife is full of the wonderfully human character of these beautiful plays. Mary: "Ah, my sweet husband, would ye tell to me what tree is yon standing upon yon hill?" Joseph: "Forsooth, Mary, it is called a cherry tree. In time of year ye might feed you thereon your fill." Mary: "Turn again, husband, and behold yon tree, how that it blossoms now so sweetly." Joseph: "Come on, Mary, that we were at yon city, or else we may be blamed, I tell you lively." Mary: "Now, my spouse, I pray you to behold how the cherries grow upon yon tree, for to have thereof right fain I would, and if it pleased you to labour so much for me." Joseph: "Your desire to fulfil I shall assay secondly. Ow, to pluck you of these cherries it is a work wild, for the tree is so high it will not be lightly. Therefore let him pluck you cherries, begat you with child." Mary: "Now, good Lord, I pray thee grant me this boon, to have of these cherries, and it be your will. Now I thank it God this tree boweth to me down. I may now gather enough and eat my fill." Joseph: "Oh, I know well I have offended my God in Trinity, speaking to my spouse these unkind words. For now I believe well it may none other be, but that my spouse beareth the King's Son of bliss. He helps us now at our need." From here the legend begins to appear in a huge number of folk carols and ballad broadside sheets. As so often in folk traditions, the various elements of the narrative mix freely. One branch of the main stem deals with Joseph's doubts, with no mention of magical fruit. Songs of this type appear under titles such as Joseph Was a Walking and Joseph and the Angel. A ballad sheet of around 1660 starts, "When righteous Joseph wedded was." Words, as usual, are printed without music, and the purchaser is instructed to sing the lyric, to the tune of the blazing torch. In fact, the text is in the familiar alternation of 8 and 6-syllable lines, known as common metre, meaning that any suitable tune would fit just as well as the one the printer suggests, a ubiquitous feature of metrical psalms and songs of the 16th and 17th centuries and beyond, so no doubt this cheerful tale of Joseph's little wobble found itself sung to all sorts of different tunes. Some versions begin with Joseph taking Mary on his knee. Others add a sort of coda in which Mary in turn takes the Christ child on her knee and questions him about his eventual death and resurrection. Not the only instance in the folk literature where Jesus goes from speaking in the womb to appearing as a living human boy without missing a beat. Some add a refrain based on the tradition of holly and ivy carols. Even the familiar first line takes a bit of unpicking. Most versions begin, "Joseph was an old man," but nowhere in Scripture is Joseph referred to as old. He's just a man. The tradition of a much older Joseph, wedded to a younger Mary, appears to have begun with the infancy Gospels which gave us the banana palm. In pseudo-Matthew, Mary is 14, and Joseph initially demurs from accepting the invitation to marry her, bashfully pointing out to the priests, "I am an old man and have children. Why do you hand over to me this infant who is younger than my grandsons?" The details stuck, part of the eternal iconography of the Holy Family, but even this familiar image of the grey-beard Joseph looking lovingly over the shoulder of his childlike bride is not immune from the vagaries of an oral folk tradition. Some, though not all, of the many variants noted by Cecil Sharp, Alan Lomax, Maud Carpels, John Jacob Niles, and others in the southern and eastern United States in the early years of the 20th century begin, for no obvious reason, Joseph was a young man. There are, in fact, so many versions that this chapter might be more accurately called the Cherry Tree Carols rather than Carol. The collectors and editors who preserved them for us contain some familiar names. William Home printed a version in Ancient Mysteries Described in 1823. William Sandys published a different variant 10 years later, together with the tune sung today, but in a wonderfully lopsided and rather odd rhythm, which might well just be Sandys getting his minims muddled with his crotchets. He was an assiduous scholar, but not a great musician. The fine 20th century historian of hymns and carols, Eric Routley, thinks Sandys' harmonisations sometimes sound like Auntie at the parlour piano. William Henry Husk included the song in Songs of the Nativity in 1868, with the melody and rhythm closer, but still not quite aligned to the version most often sung today. The pseudonymous Joshua Sylvester compares verses from the West Country and Warwickshire in his A Garland of Christmas Carols, ancient and modern of 1861, but without giving a tune. Henry Ramsden Bramley and John Stainer's version in Christmas Carols New and Old of 1871 refers to Mary as Queen of Galilee and gives an entirely different melody in a lilting 3/4 time. There are 4 versions of the text in Francis James Child's influential collection of more than 300 folk ballads assembled in the later 19th century, and it is number 453 in the currently more than 20,000 entries in the Roud Folk Song Index hosted by the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library. Older songs tend to get lower numbers. Cecil Sharp collected no fewer than 8 variants. And this one on the left here, about here, is the version by William Sandys. So the song that follows can no more be said to be the right or even the best example of its type than can an individual cherry on the tree. All are slightly different, drawing on shared roots to make something distinctive and precious. All too are delicious, colourful, evocative, and somehow very English. So, the next one I'm going to do is In the Bleak Midwinter. So, this is Carol 6 in this book. So, in the bleak midwinter, frosty wind made moan. Earth stood hard as iron, water like a stone. Snow had fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow, in the bleak midwinter, long ago. And if you think you're wondering, well, have I heard this before? Yes, we covered it during our Advent series on the Messiah. And I was reading Christmas carols by, who's he by? Christopher Idle. But I thought this one needed a lot more explaining, a more bigger history. Our God, heaven cannot hold him, nor earth sustain. Heaven and earth shall flee away when he comes to reign. In the bleak midwinter a stable place sufficed, the Lord God Almighty, Jesus Christ. Enough for him whom cherubim worship night and day. A breastful of milk and a mangerful of hay, enough for him whom angels fall down before, the ox and ass and camel which adore. Angels and archangels may have gathered there, cherubim and seraphim thronged the air, but only his mother in her maiden bliss worshipped the beloved with a kiss. What can I give him, poor as I am? If I were a shepherd I would bring a lamb. If I were a wise man, I would do my part. Yet what can I give him? Give my heart. In the bleak midwinter. One of our most hallowed Christmas traditions, alongside mince pies and a sherry at Auntie's, is the annual competition to find our favourite carol. Magazines and broadcasters regularly run a festive countdown, voted on by readers or listeners, or by a panel of experts who probably give the exercise more or less attention, depending on whether or not they're being paid. Results vary depending on what's included, congregational items only, or choir carols as well. Folk songs or newly composed pieces, sacred or secular? What about a wassail? Noddy Holder as a write-in? And how about Jingle Bells? There are trends and consistencies in the results. Top of the list of favourite English carols is often O Holy Night, which I intend to cover tomorrow, which isn't remotely English but French to its Gaulois blushed fingertips. Even the English translation hails from America, not England. The words are an un-English mixture of Catholicism and Unitarianism, and it's an aria, not a choral piece. More of that later, in a later chapter. A top 30 in the November 2022 edition of the UK's classical music magazine described its chosen winner as nigh on perfect. Viewers of BBC TV's Songs of Praise at Christmas 2020 put the same song a respectable third. A 2008 poll of leading choral directors placed it first. Broadcaster Classic FM gave this carol unique honours in 2018 by ranking it third and sixth. Many of our carols have been sung to different tunes in their lifetimes. Several still have two tunes, but typically these tend to belong to different countries. Americans have a different melody for O Little Town of Bethlehem from British singers, for example. The same is true of Away in a Manger. Most people know one or the other. In the Bleak Midwinter unusually has two melodies, both in regular use in the UK. Both do their job beautifully, though that task is subtly different. To the melodies in a moment. For the words, we are back in the same poetic hinterland as the last chapter. And the last chapter being, of course, Once in Royal David City in this book. Like Once in Royal David City, in the case of In the Bleak Midwinter, we know who wrote the words, what they wrote, and when, and who wrote the tune, or in this case, tunes. This certainly saves songs from the vagaries of editors and arrangers, mostly, and makes our job easier, though in one way less fun. Christina Rossetti was born into an intensely literary and artistic family in London in 1830. Her father was an Italian poet and political exile. Her mother, a former member of Lord Byron's circle. Her brother was the painter Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and both of her other siblings became writers. There were struggles too. As she entered her teenage years, the family encountered financial difficulties linked to her father's decline in physical and mental health. Christina herself suffered recurring bouts of depression and a series of breakdowns. Along with her mother, she developed an intense religiosity and interest in the Anglo-Catholic movement within the Church of England. She had 3 serious suitors but never married, twice for religious reasons. She died in 1894. And Christina Rossetti is shown here as a model for the Virgin Mary, the Annunciation by Dante Gabriel Rossetti, 1850, as you can see. In her poetry, her life, and her many appearances as a model in the cool pre-Raphaelite paintings of her brother, many later commentators have found Rossetti a rich exemplar of the effect on a sensitive and talented mind of the opportunities and experiences available to women within a certain slice of Victorian artistic society. A potent mixture of education, social expectation, idealism, personal repression, and lack of fulfilment, career, men, money, and religiosity. In her 1856 sonnet, in an artist's studio, she describes with her habitual startling precision and clarity the experience of an artist's model, seeing herself refracted through the painter's palette and brush. One face looks out from all his canvases, not as she is, but as she fills his dream. Christina Rossetti's poem In the Bleak Midwinter was published in 1872 under the original title A Christmas Carol. It stands as a perfect example of her almost uncanny ability to distill complex thoughts and emotions into language of almost childlike directness, something she shared with and no doubt partly learnt from her older and at the time rather more successful contemporary, a poet to whom she is often compared. Elizabeth Browning. Both writers clearly knew and loved their inheritance of religious and amorous verse of an earlier age of spiritual seeking. Their Herbert and Donne, as well as the timeless cadences of Cranmer, the Book of Common Prayer, and the King James Bible. A Christmas Carol first appeared in print, perhaps surprisingly, in New York. Scribner's Monthly was not so much a magazine as an encyclopedia, offering its readers stirring tales of tiger hunting in India, complete with vivid illustrations of the hunter trapped up a tree by his rampant roaring prey. Long technical descriptions of the building of the harbour at Hell Gate Bay, now New York's East River, complete with engineers' drawings. An argument as to why women shouldn't be allowed to vote or attain too much education and shouldn't want to. The problem of higher education for them is of but illusory importance. It is miraculous how much they make of a little education, so much that a great deal more makes very little difference. That's the views of the time. Pieces on birds, bats, bugs and botany. Reviews, romances, parables, poems, polemics and pictures. The collected edition of the volumes from November 1871 to April 1872 runs to 760 pages. It is a handsome testament to a society finding its civilized feet just a few short years after the homegrown horrors of the Civil War. Religion runs through its pages like a sort of moral backbone, from articles on the dangers of spiritual quackery to speculations about the precise parentage of Christ. Poems on sacred or moralizing themes appear every few pages. Most of the explicitly Christmassy items appear in the January rather than the December edition, an old school and, strictly speaking, more correct form of observance. The contents page lists Christmas Carol, a poem, illustrated, Christina G. Rossetti, on page 278, between an article about the giant redwoods of Yosemite and a Dickensian tale of a miser cured at Christmas by ghosts and goblins. In 1875, Rossetti published a lengthy volume of verse under the title Goblin Market, The Prince's Progress and Other Poems. It is a reissue of an earlier collection with several additional items, including A Christmas Carol. It was reprinted again later in the decade. Here are sad and beautiful poems, full of yearning for lost love and religious fulfilment. Form and metre are varied and skilfully deployed. Rossetti herself gazes at us disconcertingly from stagey illustrations by her brother, not, of course, as she is, but as she filled his dreams. Rossetti uses the word carol in this context to mean words only. The music for this carol followed after her death. Gustav Holst went first. Holst composed his setting of In the Bleak Midwinter for the first edition of the English hymnal, published in 1906, whose musical editor was his lifelong friend and musical soulmate, Rev. Vaughan Williams. Holst called his tune Cranham after the village in the Cotswolds where he and his wife had recently been living. Vaughan Williams also used Cotswolds place names for his hymn tunes, as indeed did others. A hymn book and a pevsner would be admirable guides and companions for the most English of days out, cycle clips clutched in awkward reverence at each stone church porch, as poet Philip Larkin put it. The second celebrated setting followed soon after. Harold Dart was organist of St Michael's Cornhill in the City of London for half a century, from 1916. With a break deputising for Boris Ord at King's College, Cambridge during the Second World War. He composed his setting of Rossetti's poem in 1911 as a Christmas gift for a friend. Like Holst's, it is basically neither more nor less than that precious thing, a tune, carefully fashioned around the poet's typically irregular metrical scheme. But while Holst confines himself to a simple four-part harmonisation, suitable for congregational singing according to his brief for the hymnal, Dart spreads his ambition over a slightly larger canvas, with a dreamily floating organ introduction, verses for soprano and tenor, a cappella harmony, some wordless accompaniment to usher in the hushed last verse, and a gentle coda carrying the soprano line up to a high G before the organ drifts back to its opening phrases. It is almost, to borrow a title coined around the same time by another notable composer of carols, a native of the Cotswolds, Herbert Howells, a carol anthem. Dark omits Rossetti's original fourth verse in order to create his regular musical scheme for 2 pairs of verses, solo then choir. He also blushingly changed a breastful of milk to a heartful of mirth, which was a bit over-prudish even for a child of the Victorian age, and certainly not in keeping with centuries-old traditions of poetic and visual images of the Virgin and Child. Editors soon changed it back. He thus loses Rossetti's touching counterpointing of angels loudly thronging the air with the image of a young mother gently touching her baby's forehead with a kiss. But his musical plan leads the listener movingly into the poet's last verse, which turns at last to the first person. What can I give him, poor as I am? Dark and Holst deserved their shared Christmas laurels in the ranking of Classic FM, Songs of Praise, and other seasonal pollsters. There are some other settings and treatments worthy of note. Reverend Thomas B. Strong, variously Vice-Chancellor of Oxford University, Dean of Christ Church, Bishop of Oxford, and a patron and supporter of the young William Walton, set the poem for choir not very well. Benjamin Britten made typically spooky use of the text by combining it with the traditional Corpus Christi carol, sung respectively by women's voices in clashing, wintry seconds and by boys' voices in his early choral variations. A Boy Was Born, one of the works that brought him to prominence and established his reputation. Coming up to date in 2016, composer and producer Jacob Collier turned the dark setting into a hugely inventive multi-tracked composition of his own, which he held on Twitter as my first foray into the microtonal realm. It's a slightly weird mixture of 1960s Darmstadt electronica and smart-suited sleigh-belled swingles, but it's well worth watching 10 spiky-haired Jacobs performing the piece on YouTube. They're clearly enjoying themselves. Ian Bradley, one of the most liberal and sympathetic commentators on such matters, has questioned elements of Rossetti's theology in A Christmas Carol. Is it right to say that heaven cannot hold God, nor the earth sustain? And what about heaven and earth fleeing away when he comes to reign? But maybe the poet was mirroring, consciously or otherwise, St. John the Divine's vision of last things in the book of Revelation. And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. Perhaps there is a hint here too of John Donne's account of the house and gate of heaven, where there shall be no ends nor beginnings, but one equal eternity. It is a beautiful poem. It treads a thoughtful journey from describing the weather to watching the baby to a vision of angels and finally to the poet's own inward thoughts. The language is startlingly direct. What other poet would dare to write 2 lines of verse containing 9 words, no fewer than 5 of which are snow? Snow had fallen, snow on snow, snow on snow. Ending each verse with a line of just 3 syllables is a touch of genius. Long ago. With a kiss. Rossetti ends with a plea to be allowed to do what perhaps she most longed to do but never did or could. Give my heart. And next, I wonder as I wander. I wonder as I wander out under the sky, how Jesus our Saviour did come for to die, for poor, ordinary people like you and like I. I wonder as I wander out under the sky. When Mary birthed Jesus, 'twas in a cow stall, with wise men and farmers and shepherds and all. But high from God's heaven a star's light did fall, and the promise of ages it then did recall. If Jesus had wanted for any wee thing, a star in the sky or a bird on the wing, or all of God's angels in heaven for to sing. He surely could have it, 'cause he was the king. So, folk songs and Christmas go together like turkey and cranberry sauce. They are as much a part of our traditional Christmas festivities as fairy lights and traffic jams. They didn't always get there in a straight line. Sometimes the connection between folk imagery and Christmas is obscure, to say the least. Others originally had nothing to do with Christmas. Composers and clerics have draped seasonal associations all over them like tinsel on a tree. All these songs owe their place in our repertoire to the person who first wrote them down. This too is not as straightforward a process as it sounds. Folk songs, by definition, exist in many different versions. They change from one village to the next, one generation to another. Which version should the collector use? What gives him, or in some notable cases her, the right to set one particular version in stone? By preserving the oral tradition, are we or not also ending it? On the other hand, is the collector permitted to add something, to consider his own version just one variant among many? Is he allowed to polish up a rough original, or finish something that he finds incomplete? I Wonder As I Wander is an Appalachian folk song, or at least a bit of it is. The first collector to make a serious attempt to record the folk music of the Appalachian Mountains was an Englishman, Cecil Sharp. Sharp was unquestionably top of the class among collectors, a dedicated and single-minded pioneer going out along the highways and hedges of the south and west of England and elsewhere in search of songs, dances, melodies, ballads, and anything else he could find. The huge and wonderful archive based at Cecil Sharp House in North London is his legacy. He visited the higher reaches of the Appalachian Hills, stretching from Virginia to South Carolina, in 1916. He didn't like it much. "It is strenuous work," he wrote. "There are no roads in our sense of the word. I go about in a blue shirt, a pair of flannel trousers with a belt, a Panama hat and an umbrella. The heat is very trying." His vegetarianism proved a challenge in the land of the chitlin, a dish made of pig's intestines. Many of the songs he collected are versions of English originals, presumably arrived on the eastern seaboard with settlers from the 17th century on, then taken on a fascinating new life of their own. There are, for example, two versions of the familiar English favourite, the Cherry Tree Carol, with both words and music given a distinctive local twang. Then Joseph said to Mary, "Go so rough and unkind, let the daddy of the baby get the cherries for thine." Sharp was a champion and a hero of the folk movement, no question, but some also see him as a manipulator, preserving, even creating, a particular aspect of folk art to suit an agenda of his own. His Appalachian collection ignores black singers, from whom he took down just 2 of his 122 published songs. Some suspect a political motive in the turmoil surrounding the reordering of class and society in the years around the First World War. A hilarious cine film sums up the contradictions. Sharp performing a Morris dance, gamely hopping and skipping and waving his hanky, dressed in a three-piece tweed suit and looking as unlike an authentic redneck son of the soil as it is possible to look. Then he forgets the steps and bumps smack into his dancing partner, nearly sending them both flying. Sharp didn't help resolve the riddle around his own motives by a clam-like secrecy about himself as a person in his voluminous diaries and writings. A biography by his long-term collaborator Maud Carpellas guards his public image equally jealously, making him out to be some kind of saint. Sharp wasn't the only English aesthete of the first half of the 20th century to use his art to cover up and deal with contradictions in his own psyche. Nor was he the last folk song collector to possibly push the meaning and content of a song beyond what he originally found. John Jacob Niles trod the slopes of the Appalachians a couple of decades after Sharp had shipped his umbrella and his Panama hat back to Somerset. Unlike his Greek predecessor, Niles was a native. Here he describes the part music played in his childhood. When I was a child growing up in Kentucky, we made what we needed. The daily life of my people at home was full of interesting snatches of music, perhaps just a single couplet and 4 measures of melody. We made our own fun, we made our own music, we even made our own instruments. When I was quite small, my father bought me a 3-string dulcimer, but when I was up in my teens and wanted a bigger and better dulcimer, my father told me to get busy and make one. I've been making my own dulcimers ever since. I do not have a cold, trust me, my voice goes like this. After I've been reading, 45 minutes nearly. This same hands-on, creative, practical approach applies to the music as well as the instruments it is played on. If a song exists as just a few interesting snatches, but could potentially be usable in an extended and adapted form, then your job as a singer is to finish it and use it. As Niles said later in life, as I look back across 50 years of public performances, I'm convinced that a concert singer who is not also a composer and a poet is at a definite disadvantage. Other 20th century troubadours like Bob Dylan, John Lennon and Paul McCartney and Jacques Brel would surely agree with that. This creative willingness to work an incomplete original into something for practical use finds its perfect expression in I Wonder as I Wander. Niles takes up the story. I Wonder as I Wander grew out of 3 lines of music sung for me by a girl who called herself Annie Morgan. The place was Murphy, North Carolina, and the time was July 1933. The Morgan family, revivalists all, were about to be ejected by the police after having camped in the town square for some little time, cooking, washing, hanging their wash from the Confederate monument, and generally conducting themselves in such a way as to be classed a public nuisance. Preacher Morgan and his wife pled poverty. They had to hold one more meeting in order to buy enough gas to get out of town. It was then that Annie Morgan came out, a tousled, unwashed blonde, and very lovely. She sang the first 3 lines of the verse of I Wonder as I Wander. At 25 cents a performance, I tried to get her to sing all the song. After 8 tries, all of which are carefully recorded in my notes, I had only 3 lines of verse, a garbled fragment of melodic material, and a magnificent idea. With the writing of additional verses and the development of the original melodic material, I Wonder as I Wander came into being. Niles began including it in concerts. His own recording from 1958 provides a fascinating glimpse of the hillbilly hinterland of this song before it put away childish things and became a pretty little church carol. He accompanies himself on the dulcimer, repeating each twangy metal string chord, more or less ad-lib, as he delivers the tune in a free, improvisatory rhythm over the top, without any real metrical pulse. Typically, he exploits the extremes of vocal range by putting the tune in a high key, in this case F minor, showing off his characteristic eerie falsetto on the long held-top C in the refrain. The effect is strange, intriguing, compelling, and a million miles from any polished choir stall or starched surplice. And that in the picture is Duke Park in Murphy, North Carolina, where the Morgan family probably camped. The song caught on, and like so many others with their roots in the fertile soil of folk traditions, it soon entered the repertoire of soloists and choral groups wherever the English language is spoken or sung, as Niles put it. Is it a folk song? In a sense, Niles was doing no more than any other folk musician, using the bits he and his fellow singers can remember and making up the rest. That's how a folk tradition evolves and continues. But at the same time, Niles was perfectly well aware of the difference between a real folk melody and a composed song, certainly as far as the legal and financial implications go. When he wrote a new melody to Black is the Colour of My True Love's Hair, he carefully distinguished between my composition and the public domain material. The vocabulary of a man well used to the niceties of copyright law, and adding perhaps rather ruefully, my composition has since been discovered by many an aspiring folk singer. Like Vaughan Williams, Niles built the cadences, the language and the flavour of authentic folk song into his own original conceptions, and like Vaughan Williams it is sometimes unclear where the boundaries lie. In claiming his royalties he is perhaps doing no more than young Annie, whose memory seems to have been mysteriously stimulated to successively greater feats of collection by the cumulative promise of 25 cents a performance. Let's hope Annie earned her family their tankful of gas out of town. Whatever the details of who wrote what, we have a gorgeous haunting song with the kind of lilting modal melody and characterful dialect-tinged lyrics that leap from every page of Sharp's monumental collection. This is the authentic voice of the Appalachian Hills. The words have that strange mixture of the voice of the English Puritan and an earthier American religious accent which appear from the early days of the Bay Psalm Book and beyond. It's often been suggested that some aspects of Elizabethan English survived in America from the language brought over on the Mayflower in a way that they did not in England. Here are archaisms and inversions like "come for to die," and it then did recall. The promise of ages could be crammer. Any wee thing sounds curiously Scottish. At the same time, birthed and ornery are distinctively American formations. Ornery, interestingly, has the additional dialect meaning of cantankerous or cranky, as well as being an abbreviation of ordinary. Worth remembering next time you sing it, and glance round your congregation and fellow choir members. Many genuine folk songs cover more of the life and teachings of Jesus than just the Nativity. The first verse of this one, the bit Annie managed to remember, is perhaps more properly an Easter carol than a Christmas one. Then it takes off on a series of rambling reflections, as free from settling on any kind of devotional point as a star in the sky or a bird on the wing. We owe this lovely song to a chance encounter between a little girl and a musician of creativity and imagination. Niles and his kin across the continents and ages have preserved for us uncountable musical riches. How many Annie Morgans have wandered off into silence and darkness, their motor cars spluttering out of the town square on half a tank of gas, their washing safely retrieved from the stern statue of Silent Sam, the Confederate soldier, itself long since vanished. And how many are still out there? And that is the recording of John Jacob Miles's own recording of I Wonder As I Wander Out Under the Sky, 1939. So, tomorrow I'm going to do O Holy Night, the first Noel, and it may be It Came Upon the Midnight Clear, it might be Joy to the World, or it might be Christians Awake, Salute the Happy Morn, which I have already covered. We've done Silent Night, so I think I will do O Holy Night, the first Noel, and it could be, well, it probably won't be It Came Upon the Midnight Clear. That was written by a Quaker, but it's still a very nice one. I think we covered that originally. I think we did cover Christians Awake, But then we are in the Christmas to Epiphany era, so I might well do Quem Pastores. And then, of course, on Twelfth Night, we'll read from both books, and we will do the same for the Epiphany. And the next night, I'll do you the Sussex Mummers Carol. Tomorrow should be my dancing day, and it will probably be Jingle Bells, but could well be God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. But until then, as always, may God bless you all. Amen.